like to welcome everyone officially to the Brenntag webinar, Successful Biological Treatment. This is a series that we've been doing on a regular basis. Do want to show you that I want my screen advance. So if you note, up in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see an orange button, orange arrow. If you click that orange arrow, it'll expand to look something like this. And during the webinar, if you have a question, you can simply type it in this location and then hit the send button, and it'll come to me, and I will, at appropriate point, pass the question on to Pat, our presenter. If we don't get to your question, don't be concerned. It's stored, and Pat or I will get back with you with answers to your question at some point after the webinar, but wanted to at least give you instructions on how to do this. And they can click here to minimize once you've asked your question so you can see the full screen. Let me start out by introducing myself. My name is Kevin Cope. I'm Business Development Application Specialist for Brenntag North America. I'll be your host today. In the past, Brenntag has done a number of different webinars. On your screen, you'll be able to see some of the ones that we have already previously done. Each webinar is available in PDF form, and some are available in video. This webinar will be available in video several days after the presentation. It takes a few days to process the video. So again, this presentation today is going to be Successful Biological Treatment. I'm very excited to introduce our presenter today, gentleman Pat Beeman. He would be our presenter. Pat, by the way, is the one vertical on the picture on the right. But Pat is the bioadditives manager for Brenntag Mid-South Incorporated. Pat is from New Harmony, Indiana, and he is specialized in biological treatment and municipal wastewater. On a personal note, I've been in this industry for about 40 years, and I found Pat's presentations to really be the best in making it a very complex subject very understandable. So I'm very excited to have him present. Pat attended Vincennes University. Pat started a small water treatment plant in 1982, and he likes to torment fish, obviously from the picture on the right, all across the Midwest. So with that, I will turn it over to Pat. Pat, the presentation is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. So anyway, I'll tell you that I'm in North Louisiana today, and it's very sunny and warm and really kind of nice. So I hope you all are seeing spring one of these days soon. Okay, our agenda kind of looks like this today. What's microbiology, and then why bacteria work or don't work. What are some of the parameters we're concerned with when it comes to biological treatment? How fast do bacteria grow? How fast do they don't grow? We're going to talk about micro and macronutrients, and we're probably going to talk about ORP with a little cut in of dissolved oxygen on that issue. So that's kind of what we're going to get started with. Okay, biological treatment is back. It started in the early 80s. I remember vividly when it started. And what happened was it was a really bad word in the 90s up to about 2005. There was a lot of what we called sawdust salespeople out there that that would sell bacteria in a bucket, and it made a really bad name. But now we're getting some really good players in the field today. They had very diluted material, what's called a low CFU, and a CFU is a colony forming unit. That is a group of bacteria, and that's how you get when you see a product that's 4 or 5 billion CFUs per gram. That's kind of that's how you gauge it. Okay, I'm trying to get my slide to progress here. Okay, now the industry is back. It's pretty darn heavy. We are establishing ourselves as a highly technical company with answers. We're trying to get all the parameters together to make you a successful biological process. Okay, our technical expertise has driven this industry in that we're getting the sawdust people out of here and we're getting new people in. When testing tools are coming along these days, ATP, which is was abbreviation for a product called adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is basically a parameter that you can measure today. That it's basically a measure of cell blood. So we can figure out basically how many live cells you have, how many dead cells you have floating out in the water, and that way it gives us an indication on how well we're doing. There's another process out there called respirometry. We use it quite often to decide if you can add something to a biological process, whether it's going to be good or not. Basically, you're measuring the amount of carbon dioxide in the head space of a jar, and it tells you when the carbon dioxide is being produced very, very heavily, it pumps more oxygen into the headspace, which tells you the bugs are working faster. So it's a good indication of what a process may need or may not need in order to help it. And we're working with a lot of folks on process consulting. You know, where's the deficiencies in the process, and trying to figure out maybe what could be done to increase the production of bugs. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Here's some terms we jumped ahead of me. Here's some terms that we need to talk about. Number one is BOD, or biochemical oxygen demand. Now BOD, we used to run what was called a TBOD, a total BOD. And now they run what's called a CBOD, which is carbonaceous BOD. Carbonaceous is the food that the bugs eat. Sugar, spice, everything nice, so to speak. So anyway, TBOD measured everything that caused the biology to demand oxygen. CBOD just gets the carbon portion of it. Talk today about TSS, total suspended solids. We're going to talk today about NH3-N, which is ammonia nitrogen, key nutrient. Sometimes we're trying to get rid of it, and sometimes we have to add it. We're going to also today talk about phosphorus and the key role phosphorus plays. I know a lot of you folks out there now are worried about getting rid of phosphorus in your treatment plants. We're also going to talk about something called TKN, which is total Kjeldahl nitrogen, and that's basically organic nitrogen. So we're concerned with that pretty heavily. Then we're going to talk about what we do at our work a lot nowadays is micro and macro nutrient management, and that's going to be what it takes to hold up a biological process. And then I've been going all over the country crusading for the last 7 to 10 years on how to use ORP in a wastewater process, and we want to start using ORP in a wastewater process, and we want to start using it quite heavily. And we're also going to talk about dissolved oxygen and how that works with ORP. Okay. There we got a slide advance. Okay. Biochemical oxygen demand, a 5-day test designed to measure the strength of the organic waste. So this was developed a long time ago. It started out as a 20-day test, believe it or not. But you basically put some dilution water with nutrients in it, and put a portion of your wastewater in, and you put it in an incubator at 68 degrees, and 5 days later, you measure how much oxygen is consumed. It's basically how the test is done. Very simple, very easy to do. There's some control parameters that people have to understand, but it just basically gives you a test of the strength of that wastewater. In municipal wastewaters, you're going to run between 200 to 250 milligrams per liter, or parts per million. That's going to be a pretty typical municipal waste. Also, it can be a little bit lower than that, or it can be a little bit higher than that. Depends on whether there's a lot of industrial activity at the municipal plant. The industrial waste could run anywhere from 2 to 500, all the way up to maybe 35,000 parts per million or milligrams per liter, you'd have a very, 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 very heavy waste. Okay, so let's talk about a bacteria. A bacteria is just like a sponge. And if you look at it, the carbon or food, BOD, constituent or whatever you want to, it must pass through that cell wall that closely resembles a sponge. Now that means it has to be soluble and it has to be in solution, or else it's not going to go. Bacteria don't have like teeth, or they don't chew on things. They absorb things. And the only way they absorb is if the whatever constituent is completely soluble in the water. Okay, so we're going to think about washing a greasy pot with a sponge and Dawn dishwashing liquid. We're trying to soften up the grease or the material on the dish, and then we're going to wash it off. So that's what a bug does. Okay, so let's talk about hydrolyzation for a minute. That's where the bacteria have to turn something from a solid to a liquid, and it's done by creating enzymes. Now, let's talk about flies on mashed potatoes. I know it's a very interesting subject, but it should illustrate the point very, very nicely. When you see your fly land on on your mashed potatoes or something like that, since a fly doesn't have a mandible or a jaw, it has to spit those enzymes onto those mashed potatoes and turn them into a liquid. That way, the fly can put his little straw down there and he just sucks up the nutrients and all the carbon that's in the mashed potatoes. If he didn't do that, he would starve. So the same thing is going to be done by a bacteria. If you have a lot of solids in the water that are difficult to degrade, you want to hopefully will have the bacteria that create just the right amount of enzymes, that those enzymes, all it is a chemical, it's not a living substance, that they're going to detach, attack the substrate, and basically melt it and get it into a liquid. And that's what a lot of times we have to sell a plant on hydrolyzation, because we just have too many suspended solids in the water. So we have to get it dissolved and we have to get it hydrolyzed. Okay, so if you see on the right, there's a picture of dry pile of sugar with a teaspoon. Now, the bottom one, just to illustrate, when that sugar goes into the bottle, it's going to dissolve. That's when the sugar becomes soluble, and that's when a bacteria, when you no longer see it, that's when the bacteria are going to be able to use it. The pile on top is useless to a bacteria. It can't live, there's no moisture, and the sugar is a solid. So it has to be turned in and soluble. Now, if you look down on the left-hand part of the screen, you'll see this is an E. coli cell. This is a bacteria cell. And if you look, you'll see the soluble CBOD. This would be like a soluble sugar. It passes through the outside wall, which is a polysaccharide coating, and then the cell wall. And if that soluble material can get right in the center of the cell, it'll cause the cell to basically divide and make baby cells and make new ones. Now, it'll also synthesize this sugar. Just because the cell spits it out, it doesn't mean it's going to be all carbon dioxide and water. And if you have bioaugmentation people that they're going to say they're going to turn all the waste into carbon dioxide and water, it's probably not a true statement, because it's going to turn it into less polluting products, if that makes any sense. So if it's soluble, it's going to go right through the cell wall, the polysaccharide coating, through the cell wall to the center, and cause the cell to divide and make baby cells as sludge. Okay. In this particular illustration, we're going to talk about adsorption, absorption of types of BOD. Now, I said before, when we talked about years ago, we used to do what was called a total BOD. Now we do a CBOD. As you see, particulate BOD on the top, that's like starches, sugars, not sugars, I'm sorry, but flour, things with a lot of starch in it. A colloidal BOD would be all you people that was in had BOD with lots of protein. Protein would be, say, an animal kill rendering plant, egg producing plant, chicken processing type of facilities. But these types of BOD are very difficult to break down. And as you see now, you see this polysaccharide coating on the outside of a cell. This BOD as particulate and colloidal has to get in, it gets into this polysaccharide coating, but it has to be solubilized in that coating in order to get to the center, in order to feed the cell and make it divide and do all it's supposed to do. So this could be a problem for you treatment plants, which we've seen before, that this colloidal or starch will hang around and get hung in this outside coating. Now, if there's not enough nutrients in the water, it could be there for a long time. It could be there for days, maybe 3 to 5 or 10 days. And then you get a real problem in a treatment facility because you're not absorbing the waste like you should. So that's what happens when you get BOD that's hung up in a cell. Okay, this is what a bacteria looks like. This would be under the with the little 100 limbs on your microscope, with the which will be 1,000 power, and that would be your lens submerged in oil. That would be the only way you would see a bacteria like this. Now, what this thing does, if you can see my cursor, it just shakes back and forth because this is a sponge, remember. And in order to get anything in it, it's going to have to get the nutrients in through the cell wall. So if it just shakes back and forth, kind of vibrates, looks like underneath the screen, this thing don't swim around, and yeah, as you can see, it doesn't have teeth and it doesn't eat or anything like that. So it's just going to try to get as much of its body in contact with nutrients and food. Okay, here's what microbes do. They eat. You see the microbes start over on the right side, and then microbes divide, and they get more and more and more, and they grow and continuous and get bigger and bigger to higher life forms. And then what happens is they start getting weak. And the reason they get weak is because they've done all this growth and they've done all this division, and we're going to start getting into a problem to where we need maybe a new cell or we need a new stock. If you notice, if any of you grew up on farms or whatever, you know that you always got a new bull or something every 3 or 4 years because you needed new genetics. And the same way in a treatment plant, if we don't have a good source of bugs coming in all the time, I've had a couple of PhD microbiologists tell me that about 18 to 20 divisions is all you're going to get out of a viable cell. And after those 18, 20 divisions, you're going to get something that's so weak that it's really not going to do any good. So does bacteria last forever? No, they don't. Okay, after they get weak enough, they die and they make sludge. So it's something that we all deal with, the sludge. Okay, when we talk about this one, this is a growth curve of bacteria, and as you can see, they're just kind of starting out. They're getting in the system. We activate them with air, probably. Some of you anaerobically digest, but then you get this logarithm scale of growth. So it's growing like crazy. It's going up. This is a pretty steep angle, and then they kind of level out and just eat, and they don't really grow much more because genetically they're starting to get weaker, and then they start to pale off. Okay. If you look at these logarithm scale of growth, but if you look at the bottom, you see a time scale, and the time scale at about 5 to 10 hours, it's a done deal, folks. So there's no reason to, if you sit there and aerate a waste that's already treated for much longer than 10, 15, 20 hours, you're probably doing yourself a lot of damage, which we'll talk about in just a little while. Now, in our bioaugmentation efforts, sometimes we want to make this growth curve kind of get the angle a little bit more downward. We don't want it to grow too fast because we're going to use up our valuable nutrients and carbon too quickly. So we want to make that, sometimes we want to slow it down and get it on a little bit slower growth curve. So maybe we can make this stationary phase last much longer. I hope that makes sense. Okay, this is a treatment plant. I don't know, some people, you may be from the north. This was a friend of mine from Kent, Ohio. This is his wastewater treatment plant. And as you can see, this is what we call an activated sludge system. And we have air in the tanks. We're aerating the bugs, the food, which is the raw sewage coming in from the city, and the sludge, and we call it activated sludge. This material here is the mixed liquor. It's a mixed colony of lots of protozoa, fungi, bacteria, and lots of things growing in there. So thank you to Bob for sending us this picture. Now, as the activated sludge process, you have the aeration tank, which we saw in that last picture. And this is where the bugs aerate, and then they go over to a clarifier. And in that clarifier, we're going to take this new sludge, the BOD we broke down, and the new sludge we made in the clarifier. We're going to settle it out, separate the bugs from the water. We're going to let them settle, and then we're going to pull off the bugs off the bottom, and we're going to send them as return activated sludge, or they call it RAS, back to the head of the treatment plant. And the reason that we send it back to the head of the treatment plant is to repopulate the species. So we use them for everything we can get out of them. So that's the basic process. Now here's how you got to think about this. The aeration tank is used for conversion. We're going to try to get the BOD converted into living bacteria or activated sludge. Then we're going to take the clarifier and we're going to separate the bugs from the water, the bacteria from the water, and then we're going to let the clear water on top discharge. So in all essence, if you just think the aeration tank converts and the clarifier separates, that's all in the world we're doing. Okay, here's another type of species that we work with, and we get notoriety of what's going on with the archaea. And if you look up archaea is on a totally separate domain of life. There's bacteria, there's protozoans, and then there's archaea. And a lot of research has been done with them lately. They are in your wastewater treatment plant. The good news is sometimes they need a little help to get activated, but they're kind of a ubiquitous type of organism to which they're just everywhere. And they grow a lot in the soil. But they attach themselves to the bacteria cell, the gelatinous material in the cell, and the waste material that comes off the bacteria, the archaea suck down. And they suck down very, very, very quickly. So you get just a little bit more treatment if we are able to utilize the archaea in the system more. Okay, here's the bottom line on sludge production. When engineering companies or whatever, when they design wastewater treatment plants, so if you think about the first statement, 1 pound of non-soluble BOD in and not solubilized, you're going to get a pound of sludge out, solids out. The bottom bullet of 1 pound of non-soluble CBOD, or carbonaceous biochemical oxygen demand, in and converted and solubilized will create about 0.5 to 0.6 pounds of solids under aerobic conditions. So if you got a pound of BOD in and you solubilize it in your activated sludge plant, when you get all completely said and done, you should make about 0.5 pound of solids, and that would be activated bacteria. Okay, now let's talk about carbon. All right, if we got a lot of carbon in a system, if you've got a plant that produces sugar, any kind of starches, things like that, you're going to have a lot of BOD. Then we got to start asking ourselves some questions. Are you nitrogen deficient? Do you have enough ammonia in the system? Many times there's so much carbon in the water that there's no ammonia left, and there's a good possibility we're going to have to add some. This is aerobic systems only. Your anaerobic systems may not be a factor, but it still could be. We still need to talk about it if you have questions about it. Okay, the carbon's still too high. Is there any phosphorus in the system? Phosphoric acid is the best choice to add by far because it's the total phosphorus in the water. Maybe we need to back up just a moment and talk about that. Most of you people that have phosphorus limits, you're measuring the total phosphorus in the water. Now, us bug people don't really care about total phosphorus because we want to know what the orthophosphate is. Orthophosphate is the only portion of the phosphorus that the bugs can use. So phosphoric acid would be like your number one choice when it comes to a phosphorus addition to a plant. Now, I want to give you a quick note here. We have found problems with nitrogen and phosphorus mixtures. I wouldn't do it. I think it's kind of a rookie mistake. There's companies out there saying we'll put the ammonia and phosphorus both into one tank and feed them. And excuse me, I don't. We're not having that much luck with it keeping the nitrogen and phosphorus up because it restricts your ability to add more nitrogen, less phosphorus, or more phosphorus and less nitrogen. So we need to keep that rookie mistake out of there. Okay, let's talk about pH. Typically, a wastewater system is going to run at about 6.8 to 7.2. That's where it should run optimal. If we have a body pH, our body pH runs about 7.3. And I have talked to my doctor about this, and he said if your body pH gets messed up, you are probably not feeling very good at all. So you don't want to get that pH screwed up. How would you get the pH screwed up? Well, let's talk about Thanksgiving dinner, something like that. When you just gorge yourself, like I always do at food, you get too much carbon in your system without enough nitrogen or any kind of nutrient or what have you, or amino acids, and you feel bloated and disgusting. So anyway, you've got to keep your pH back up in the body in order to feel better. So the bugs are exactly the same way. Okay, this is this slide that if you were taking notes, this would be the one I would take notes on. If you need about 100 BOD, and you need about 5 nitrogen, and you need 1 phosphorus, and these are parts per million, and you need about a half a part per million iron. Now, a lot of people say, well, I got a lot of iron in my water system. I said, well, okay, good. Is it something the bugs can use? Remember, it's got to be soluble. It's got to be chelated as a mineral in order to use. So your carbon and phosphorus, nitrogen and phosphorus, your nitrogen can be 10, 15. I'm not going to have a problem with that. Your phosphorus can be 1, 2, or 3. Really, too much phosphorus can't hurt you. You just have to get rid of it in some cases. But all the people that talk to me about adding iron to a system, you're never going to get a problem with me when it comes to adding iron, because if you have a little extra iron in the system, it doesn't make a lot of difference. It's not going to hurt anything. Now, the reason I put pH low out here to the side is because if you have, let's say this is 200 carbon, and you start getting low on nitrogen, your carbon will lower your pH. On the other hand, if this carbon starts to go down and your ammonia starts coming up, it should cause your pH to come up slightly. And phosphorus, it'll cause it, if you get a little higher phosphorus, it'll get a little slightly higher pH. So this is what it takes to make a sewage plant operate right here, 100, 5, and 1. Okay, let's talk about ammonium versus ammonia. Now, ammonium is ammonia, but it's a lower pH, okay? And I put out here to the sides bug food. If you get ammonia and you get a high pH, it's going to be totally toxic to the bugs. So if you have I get a lot of lagoon calls, and there's some lagoons that I do work with, and I have in the past. A lot of times you'll see they'll get a really, really, really high pH, and if you added bugs, or you can't figure out why things aren't working very good, is because the pH is so high, the ammonia is totally toxic. Anything over about 9 to 9.2, then you're going to have a lot of trouble with the ammonia toxicity. Okay, alkalinity. Alkalinity refers to the capability of water to neutralize acids. What I like to say in my talks is, let's try to strive for 100 residual alkalinity. And the reason I want 100 is because I want to make sure that we have enough there. Now, if you want to get real down and dirty about alkalinity, it's like a floor. It's like a floor that holds the pH up. So if you break through the floor, you're probably going to get a very, very, very low pH. And I've solved tons and tons of problems in wastewater treatment plants with just having one of these little Hawk test kits of alkalinity strips in my front pocket. Check the alkalinity, and it is nothing. And that's a problem. 0 alkalinity equals 0 bugs. Okay? Okay. Now, when you have a lot of ammonia in the water, as you folks in the chicken, turkey kill business, lots of ammonia in the water, when you oxidize ammonium, and remember ammonium is ammonia at a low pH, when it oxidizes, it converts to a nitrite, and then it converts to a nitrate. Now, when it converts from a nitrate to a nitrite to a nitrate, during that process, a weak acid is produced, and it's called nitrous acid, and that's any acid is going to burn off alkalinity. So if you got lots and lots and lots of ammonia in the water, and as you're converting, when you get from nitrite to nitrate, you'll make acid, and that's when the alkalinity is needed. So that's why the pH goes down when you're doing that. Now, just as a side, I threw this in there. I've had a lot of questions about this. If you get caught, as a slide before, if you get caught in the nitrite stage and it doesn't do a complete conversion to nitrates, excuse me, and you're adding chlorine to the water, it'll take 13 pounds of chlorine to oxidize 1 pound of nitrites. So if you're seeing any nitrites at all, then there's a problem in an activated sludge type of wastewater treatment plant. And lo and behold, Hawk's got this nice little test kit with the little dipping strips that you dip them down in the water and test it, and everything's, it'll tell you what the nitrites and the nitrites are. You should have lots and lots of nitrates, but you shouldn't have any nitrites at all. Okay, so back to this alkalinity thing. It takes 7.2 pounds of alkalinity to get rid of 1 pound of ammonia. So we're going to have to buffer the water if we're getting rid of a lot of ammonia. Now, here's some of the compounds we're going to use as alkalinity. Some of the more, if you're in a water plant operation, a lot of times they'll use sodium hydroxide, which is caustic soda. It packs a real good punch, as you can tell. Some of the other things, calcium carbonate would be like lime. Lime's not as popular as it used to be, but it is always a good way to get alkalinity in the water. A lot of the chicken kill rendering kind of people are using magnesium hydroxide. Now, I love magnesium hydroxide because it has a very good capability to put alkalinity in the water, and also magnesium is a fantastic nutrient for bugs. So you're not going to get an argument from me if you're wanting to use that. Now, keep in mind of one cool factor on sodium bicarbonate, which, if you're not sure about what that is, it comes under the name of Arm & Hammer in the store, and it's baking soda. Nitrifying bacteria, or the bugs that eat nitrogen, eat sodium bicarbonate, and that's basically the only thing they do eat. Now, so you have this has to be in the water in order to make it work. So sodium bicarbonate's always a good choice. Now, this is just a little bit of deal on Nitrus ammonis and Nitrobacter. These are the two bugs that take the ammonia out of the water. Nitrus ammonis makes it go from ammonia to a nitrite. Nitrobacter makes it go from a nitrite to a nitrate. And you can tell these are some of the common characteristics of nitrites and nitrate. As you can tell, they have a large generation time. About 40 C is where they start having trouble. So you people in the warmer climates are going to have trouble when you get to get rid of ammonia when the temperature gets really, really, really hot. So this is just a general guide. Now, as you can also tell on this, pH ranges are going to go up a little bit for nitrification. So keep that in mind as well. If you get an 8 pH and you're just nitrifying for nitrifying bacteria, that's perfectly okay. Okay, let's talk about denitrification for a little bit. Denitrification is a conversion of nitrates to nitrogen gas. Now, nitrogen is not removed from the system unless denitrification occurs. So we need to get those sizzle type of bubbles coming up in your clarifier or your system. This will give me a quick chance to talk about bubbles coming up in your wastewater, your biological system. Great big bubbles are carbon dioxide, and little bitty sizzling bubbles are nitrogen. So if you're getting the real sizzly little bubbles coming up, that means denitrification is probably occurring. The big bubbles, they're still okay. Doesn't hurt anything. It's just a lot of carbon dioxide being let off by the system. Now, when you denitrify, half the alkalinity is recovered. Now, nitrates acts exactly like oxygen acts to bugs. Not oxygen is oxygen is the energy that makes them go. But when you take the dissolved oxygen down to zero, the nitrates are an energy source and will give off an electron, and that will cause the bugs to keep working. They just work at a little bit slower pace. So that's what denitrification is. Now, here's some of the benefits of denitrification. I love it when people do this and people ask me about it, but you get a strengthening of the flock particle, and a strong flock particle tends to want to settle. So we want good, strong flock particles so they settle and don't carry over and make TSS or total suspended solids go out the effluent. You get half of the alkalinity back when you denitrify. You get a reduction of soluble BOD. Now, why would you do that? Because the bugs are still working in a 0 DO atmosphere. We're also getting rid of the nitrates because they're using those nitrates to get rid of the BOD. And I've seen when people have denitrification occurring, the soluble BOD will be very, very low coming off the effluent. If you normally would have a 5, 6, 7 BOD, this you could get down to a 1 or a 2 if you're denitrifying on a normal basis. Now, I get calls every year, usually about this time of year, on filamentous bacteria. That's the long bacteria that cause the foaming issues, the non-settling issues. And when you denitrify, most filaments don't like a 0 DO atmosphere, so you're just wearing them out. So it's a good way to get rid of some of them. And if we turn the blowers off and we're not adding as much air, we're going to save electricity. So we're going to get an energy savings. And as a good friend of mine up in Wisconsin says, you get tough bugs. They're going from a fully oxygenated atmosphere to a totally non-oxygenated atmosphere. So we get tough bugs. Okay, so let's talk about time here. What's the detention time in that secondary process? How long does the waste stay in that activated sludge basin? We really need to know that because we want to make sure we keep it in there enough time, but it's not in there too long. Temperature, 45 to 95. I see a lot of this 45-degree stuff going on and lower when we get up in our northern regions, and I work with our good people around Brentag Great Lakes. Temperature becomes a serious issue. A lot of the lower states, especially down south, saw very low temperatures this year, and they saw problems they'd never seen before. I also see a lot of plants with higher temperature rates. Now, 95 is the textbook value. you can go up to about 102 to 103, and that's when you start running into nitrification problems. So you're going to lose your ammonia nitrification many times, especially at 104 to 105. You're really going to start causing them issues. Okay, everybody asks me about dissolved oxygen all the time. I like 2, 2.5. That's a great DO. If we can get a little lower sometimes, and sometimes if you got a lot of sludge, you can run it up to 3, 3.5. That's even better for solids reduction. Okay, so I got a question for everybody here. What will the dissolved oxygen do if a toxic load comes in? And I get my industrial people, they say, well, we think we might have toxic issues. And the first question I say, well, okay, if you think you got a toxic issue, what does the DO do? And if you said the DO goes down, it's not toxic, because if the DO goes up, when you got a load coming in, that just means the bugs got killed, and you're still adding air to you're still adding air to the system, so your DO is going to go up. A good way to test this out is to go to the local treatment plant if you're in industry and get some of their activated sludge and put an aerator in it. Start pouring your water into it. If the DO goes down, it's probably very treatable. If it goes up, then we got a problem. Okay? My second question is, what happens if you keep the dissolved oxygen over 4 in an aeration tank? And the answer is, you're wasting electricity. Okay, micronutrients. We're going to call that the small stuff. All that stuff that you're not supposed to have in the water, like zinc, copper, cobalt, nickel, the bad boys that we're supposed to get all that stuff out of, we have to realize in biological treatment that you better have it. And if you don't have it, it's not going to function properly. So we've got to have those kind of issues. They got to be chelated. There's got to be a small amount in the system at all times. Macronutrients, that would be the big stuff. That would be the ammonia, that would be the phosphorus, and that would be the iron. So we got to have, as we said before, 5 to 10 ammonia and 1 to 2 phosphorus and a half a part per million of iron in a system. A big majority of my time is spent on this slide right here at all the systems when we're trying to figure out whether the nutrients are correct in a system or not, when they're light and when they're heavy. This is a picture of the inside of a cell, a bug cell. If you notice, it's got about 50% carbon. That'll be the BOD. Now, if we look at the oxygen, looks pretty similar to us, right? 20 to 22%. Now, let's get into the real meat and bones of it. 12% nitrogen. So we better have some in the system, right? 2% phosphorus. Again, we better have some of that in the system. Now we get all the way down to trace compounds here. 2%, that's the nickel, zinc, copper, cadmium, cobalt, all those, not cadmium, but a lot of the other stuff in here. That has to be those metals that have to be in the cell, and they have to be chelated in order for the cell to function properly. If you look at your vitamins, multivitamin you take, there's a list about as long as your arm of stuff in there. A lot of those are trace compounds that you have to make your body function right. Okay, this slide's probably my stellar slide to talk to you about today, and this would be a bug growth test we done. And this was the client, Sturgis, Kentucky, and we were going to do a biological bioaugmentation program, which we are doing today. However, when we had it tested and we looked at it, if you can see the red line here, that was where we added microbe strains alone. That's all we added. And if you look just above it, that was the untreated control sample in their activated sludge basin. So when we added the bugs here, it actually did worse than if we would have done nothing. Now, if you start looking up the graphs here, Here we got pH, nitrogen, phosphorus, and micronutrients. It was doing okay. Then we started adding the pH, the micronutrients, and the strains. It did real good. But then when we put the total package in and made sure all the elements in the chemistry was where it needed to be, we got growth out of sight. So as you can see, just because you want to add bugs, it could be a detriment to your system and not an asset to your system. So you got to make sure all the chemistry is in place before you start doing games like this. Okay, let's talk about oxidation reduction potential. Now, all you industry people, or a lot of you industry people, have seen this and used it for 50, 60, 70 years. Use it for metal, precipitation, plating industry, and all that. Basically, this tells you whether this gives you a number telling you, number one, is the water oxidized and how much? Now, this is kind of book values evaluation using ORP. If we have a number reading in our oxidation ditch, and let's say we set the ORP meter and start testing the water at, let's say, plus 135, and we bring that water in and we do an ammonia test on it, and the ammonia 0, that's your number from then on. So we could just set our meter at 135 and increase or decrease air supply based on that number, and we would know we had it. Now, if we go down to CBOD, usually CBOD, it takes a little less oxidation. And just a textbook version, it takes 1.5 pounds of oxygen to get rid of 1 pound of BOD. It takes 4.5 pounds of oxygen to get rid of 1 pound of ammonia. So it takes a whole bunch more to do it. Now, if you go look on down the scale, you see if you're going to denitrify, your number is going to be plus 50 to minus 50. This is something you won't even have to think about. If you have a monitor out there in the tank, you'll just see it and you'll know what to do with it. Okay, if you look on down when you're producing methane gas, and you maybe you're out in your sewer collection system and you see a minus 400 or lower in your sewer collection system, I wouldn't flip a match in it or a lit cigarette because it's liable to have an explosive characteristic. So it's just a number that we're going to determine kind of where we are. This gives us a determination of what the bugs are doing on a minute by minute basis, so we don't have to guess anymore by using ORP. And with that, I'm out of breath and I'll ask for questions.
Well, Pat, thank you very much. There were a few that came through. Let's let you catch your breath, maybe have a little glass of water. First question was, what's the best way to monitor ORP in wastewater?
The best way to monitor ORP in a wastewater system is with a continuously reading probe. A lot of people say, well, can I go ahead and get me a $150, one of those little handheld probes and go out and check it? Well, it'll give you a good number right then, but then how are you going to know without seeing some kind of chart or any kind of a graph of what it's doing day by day? In a municipality, there's no waste coming in after midnight usually until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Your ORP may be out of sight and you wouldn't see it because you wouldn't be at the treatment plant. So now they've also had these new radio read, so you don't have to run wires all over the plants. They're really they're being pretty darn innovative nowadays.
Okay. Another question. You mentioned high pH kills bacteria. What's the best way to treat a lagoon system?
The best way to treat a lagoon is, if you look, your pH will be the highest when the sun is the highest in the air. So probably from 9:30, 10 in the morning up into the evening till the sun goes down, your pHs are going to be really, really, really high. So if you're going to add bioaugmentation products, or a lot of you people add copper sulfate to lagoons to kill the algae. Number one, if there's ammonia in the water and the pH is over 9.5, the bugs are going to be toxed out. And as some of you metal people know, if you have a high pH of over 9, I believe it's 9.1, the copper will disassociate and precipitate out to the bottom of the pond and cause the bottom of the pond to be copper toxic. So it would be the best time to do it would be in the wee hours of the morning before the sun comes up, or late at night before you go to bed.
All right, one last one. You mentioned filamentous bacteria. What is the best way to control them?
Well, number one, you probably need to do a test to see which filament you're dealing with. But we've had a lot of luck lately with, as you know, a filament is, let's say it's 50 times bigger than a regular bacteria, and a filament is a bacteria. So they have a big old spongy cell wall. So when it comes to getting the most nutrients, the big guy wins and the little guy loses. So instead of chlorinating the return sludge, which everybody wants to do, and I mean it's an accepted practice, I don't see a lot of good because it kills the good bacteria as well. So what we've been doing is we've been flooding the system with nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and micronutrients, and it's been highly successful getting rid of them. And it doesn't take near as long to do it either.
All right, great. Pat, I'd like to thank you for your time today. A few other questions, but we'll get to those via emails if you guys don't mind. We're running close to the end of the session. I'm going to click to the next slide. There is the availability for a PDF version of Pat's presentation will be readily available. You can email me at kcope@brenntag.com for the PDF. And then within a few days, there will be an audio version of this that will also be available if you want to listen to it again or pass it on to someone who's unable to attend. Again, please feel free to email me at kcope@brenntag.com. We'll get that information out to you. Again, thank you very much for your attendance today, and I very much appreciate your time. With this, we will now conclude the presentation.